Hello, good morning, welcome everybody to the Ukraine Accountability Conference. My name is Ikenna Azwike and it is my honor to be your host today. Day 141 of a literally generation-defining war on European soil. Just a few rooms away from where we are sitting here in the studio sit a very big group of international ministers discussing in an unprecedented way just how we can coordinate investigations into alleged war crimes. To reflect on the proceedings today, I have four guests with me here in the studio. First of all, the liaison prosecutor for Ukraine for Eurojust, Miroslava Krasnobarova, welcome. Professor of Forensic Pathology at Maastricht University, Bella Kubat.
Good morning.
Good morning. The team leader of the team of experts on the rule of law for sexual violence in conflict, Chloé Marnay-Baszanger. Welcome, Chloé. And the Belgian parliamentarian who's also a member of the European Parliamentary Forum Executive Committee, psychologist, sexologist, UN Goodwill Ambassador for the last 25 years, I just heard, Goedele Liekens. Goedele, welcome. Now, welcome to all of our guests. For those of you who don't already know, today is an initiative of the government of the Netherlands, together with the Office of the Prosecutor for the International Criminal Court and the European Commission. But as much as today is, the focus of today is on the ministerial conference, it's also for all of you at home to keep all of you informed about what is going on and hopefully feeling a sense of inspiration and safety to continue doing the good fight, as it were. Today's ministerial conference focuses on three important areas. The first is ensuring how we can coordinate action of the international community, ensuring evidence can be brought in front of the courts successfully, and in relation to war crimes and sexual violence, it's about creating a culture of accountability in which the survivors are put at the very center.
Я не думаю, що вони будуть наказані. У мене є фото цього офіцера, який знущався над моєю родиною. Але що ці фото можуть дати?
Yeah, we'll be seeing very jarring clips like that throughout the day. They're painful to watch, but they're also a really visceral reminder of all the work that we need to do and why we need to do it. Miroslava, you're a prosecutor at Eurojust. That man we've just seen has literally lost hope of ever getting justice. What difference is a conference like this going to make?
Yes, thank you, Ikenna. Indeed, you know, it's very inspiring to witness today so many people and the leadership from so many countries all around the world, countries and also international organizations, being here in The Hague. You know, The Hague is the capital of international justice, who gathered together just to ensure accountability for Ukraine, for Ukrainian people. And, you know, I believe it's already a very strong message of support and solidarity for us. And this really means a lot. And
But is that going to give him some hope? I mean, there's
yes,
a lot of people
indeed.
Talking, but...
Yes, indeed, because, you know, from the very first days, it was for us that it was obvious that with such scale, with so many atrocities, and we will need all the help and support. And today, I believe it's a perfect moment to see what is already achieved and what can be done additionally, just to ensure that there is no place for impunity.
Yeah. Okay, well, talking about what has been achieved and what's being done, let me turn to you, Bella, because not so long ago you were part of a group of 30 experts who were on the ground in Ukraine, and you were with the Dutch military, and you were commissioned by the ICC on request of Ukraine to be there. Can you describe briefly, what did your team do there?
Well, what we did was prepare further missions, also look what's needed, how the organization could be done when you go on for the investigations in the future, because our mission was quite short. It was just 2 weeks. But it should inventory the needs that are necessary, and for the International Criminal Court also create contacts in the Ukraine. And that was very successful, because we saw within the first week we had contacts, and we could also start investigations and examinations by experts of the team.
Yeah. And one of the aspects to ensure justice and effective investigations is, of course, also being able to bring evidence in front of courts, which sounds pretty obvious to me if you're doing an investigation, but why so much focus at this conference on that aspect?
Well, if you bring evidence, it has to be sound. It's not just hearsay. You really have to have proof. For example, in my field of work, there was a case, there were many cases comparable, but there was a case of 350 people locked in a cellar, in a small cellar with very little food, almost nothing to drink, no medicine for those who needed them, and they were locked there for a month. Such a case needs to be analyzed, and there have to be sound, well-based, evidence-based reports to explain to the courts why this is very dangerous, why people die in these situations, so the judges can make a good judgment.
So, for instance, that man referencing a photo he has of a perpetrator, you'd need all sorts of additional evidence to prove that that was indeed...
Yes, of course,
yeah.
Of course. You need additional evidence, and that's why investigation teams are needed in the Ukraine, because the country is doing a tremendous job, but they can't do it on their own.
Okay, thank you, Bella.
Це відвертий геноцид українського народу. Ми будемо тебе гвалтувати до тих пір, поки ти ніколи в житті не захочеш українського мужика, для того, щоб ти в подальшому ніколи в житті не змогла народити українську дитину.
Chloe, you have extensive experience of working with survivors of sexual violence in war zones, in conflict zones. You must have heard stories like the one we just saw in that clip a lot and seen a lot. You know what you need to do. You know how to do it. You just need the funding to do it, don't you? I mean, why this whole conference?
I mean, I think what we need to remember is that historically sexual violence in conflict is one of the most silent and underreported crime, and accountability for it has been the rare exception. So I think this conference is very important, and that's why the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Patton, is here today.
Yeah.
It's to stand in solidarity first with the victims and the survivors. I think that's an important message to pass, but also to work at supporting the initiatives and efforts. We've heard Bella just now, about what is going on and how much it takes to get accountability. So we're here to support the efforts of the civil society, of survivors, and of national and international institutions in trying to bring accountability. The facts are that now we have over 100 allegations. The UN has received over 100 of allegations of cases, which doesn't mean victim, cases of sexual crimes. And we need to ensure that those women, girls, men and boys find accountability and justice.
Yeah. And I saw you really nodding in agreement when Chloe was describing how accountability is often pushed to the sideline. Going forward, part of the solution to ensure survivors find justice is creating safe spaces for them to be able to tell their story. Can you paint a picture for us? What does a safe space in that context look like? What does it mean?
Yeah, the thing here is that all survivors of sexual harassments and sexual violence, they all need to feel safe before they can speak out, before they feel safe enough to talk, which is necessary if we want justice to be done. So the thing there is that we're talking here about refugees, internally displaced people in conflict zones. So there's hardly a way to feel safe. There's danger behind every corner. So we need those safe places because their alarm system is on high alert. It's as if your smoke alarm is always beeping. So we need to first see whom, and that's the difficult part, I will talk about that later, I hope, see whom or possibly survivors, victims at that point still, and we need the volunteers, the medical staff to be trained to make sure that those women and girls and boys get a safe place where it's calm, rest, and where nothing is pushed.
But calm and rest where nothing is pushed, that requires time as well. So, you know, are we pushing too fast for justice and actually?
That's, for me, that's the major challenge. There's this dilemma between we need evidence and we need witnesses, so we need to act quickly. But the survivors, they, on the contrary, they need time. They need time to feel safe enough to open up. They have other needs. They need shelter, food, take care of their children, physical needs often. So for them, it may take a year, even 2 years before they feel good, happy enough, safe enough to talk. But by then, the witnesses, the evidence is gone. So for me, that's the major challenge.
Yeah. Miroslava.
Yeah, this is something what I'm really, I would echo, because it's very important to find this balance. Because, of course, for law enforcement, their intention is to preserve the evidence as soon as possible, you know, just when they are fresh and people can say in details. But on the other hand, in such kind of crimes, you should be very, very careful, you know, just not to cause any kind of re-victimization, and that's why we work, and I'm really happy that Chloe mentioned this, because we also need to work very closely with NGO, because they have very good intentions, but sometimes they really need to think about outcomes of their work for these evidences to be admissible in the court of law, you know. So.
And that's literally what some survivors say. You know, I felt like a piece of evidence instead of a survivor. And that's really a bad thing happening to them, because they want their dignity back. So for them, that's really important that they be treated with empathy, that they're be treated warm. So we need to work with the NGOs, the volunteers.
And Chloe, working with the NGOs, what are the best ways of ensuring that happens in a cohesive way?
I mean, I think that this conference is actually a good starting point. You know, bringing all of the actors together, including the NGOs. There was a workshop yesterday that was held as well with NGOs to have a discussion. And I think it's absolutely critical that this bridge between the different stakeholders is established. And I think this conference is an opportunity to do that, and we'll have to continue working at that on the ground in Ukraine.
And just before the conference starts, maybe just Bella, as someone who's been there so recently, are you sensitive to, or did you see these sensitivities in action?
Well, not with victims of sexual harassment or abuse, but we saw it with victims from bombings, for example. There was a house in a residential area, no important buildings in the vast surrounding. And this house was bombed. 6 people died, among them a child of 2 years old child. And there was one survivor who, by coincidence, wasn't in the house when it was shelled. And he, a young man, he lost his wife, his daughter, his parents, his brother, and his sister-in-law. And he was very brave to come and tell us the story. But these people also need attention because they are traumatized as well. So yes, in some ways we did encounter these problems also.
And what about, Hulu was talking about the sense of, I can imagine, impatience among NGOs. They want justice. Miroslava was saying it as well. Do you feel that impatience from NGOs on the ground for justice, but they know they need to wait?
It's the same dilemma. You need to collect the evidence as quickly as possible, because otherwise it may disappear or it may get corrupted. On the other hand, you have to take care of the victims, and they need support, psychological support. And if it may victimize them for the second time, because we saw with this young man that it was very hard for him to tell the story, and still he did it. So people want justice, they want to cooperate to get the justice, but it's very, very difficult for them.
Is there enough awareness of the need that people like that need the psychosocial support and mental health support? Is the culture there?
In Ukraine? Well, I've returned from Ukraine not even a month ago, and I have the feeling that it's really starting, yes. But of course, you talk to NGO people and people who are working in those shelters. But there's quite a lot Ukrainian psychologists, for instance, who really jump into and want to help their people who speak their language. So the realization is there's not enough psychologists, therapeutics, and that's what they all are screaming for. For not only for sexual violence, of course, also for all the other traumas. So yes, and it's needed, because you want those survivors. The next step, you're a victim, you become a survivor. The next step is that you become a whole person again, with a past history of these traumas, but a whole person. And to achieve that, we need them to get really good therapeutic help.
Sure. Sorry?
Yeah, I mean, to hold those points, I think what we need to remember is that, you know, the first reflex when you're in such situation is not necessarily to go and report a crime. The first reflex is, as was said, you know, for any survivors, is to secure their physical safety, mental safety, some shelter, some food. And only after that, you know, can you go into the accountability process. And I think, you know, what we need first and foremost at this point is to ensure that there is a robust investment, and I think that's a main message we want to pass at this conference.
Investment,
into
money,
services.
are you talking about?
Well, money, organization, infrastructure, coordination around the need for services, first and foremost, before you actually request and require people to be, what you said, pieces of evidence, so that they can be whole again before they enter a process that will necessarily be difficult for them and challenging.
Okay, and let's put it out there then. Where do we need to channel them? What is underfunded at the moment? What is not receiving enough support of the type that you just described?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a huge mobilization on the accountability, around the accountability narrative, around the evidence gathering, because there is a sense of urgency that, you know, we need for the purpose of trials, to have those evidence preserved before they disappear. But that doesn't need to be, you know, a screen towards actually also focusing into service. I think we need to have, you mentioned, you know, psychosocial, but psychosocial is only one step. When you're deeply traumatized, you know, by very intense types of crimes, you need more than just psychosocial support. You need specialized mental health. You need specialized services that actually is taking care of the targeted needs of those population. And I think here the international community needs to step up in terms of ensuring that this is, you know, the case, and that those efforts are funded both at the national authority level, the civil society as well. And we need to be victim-centered and survivor-focused.
And at Eurojust, are you stepping up?
Yes,
are you
indeed.
victim-centered or survivor-centered?
It's, you know, about the role of Eurojust with regard to this, to the victims. It's because it's not only in Ukraine, you know. Millions of people, they fled to Poland, to Europe, all over Europe. There are thousands of these people, and for us it was very important because, you know, of course, when person just cross the border and he or she do not hear, they do not hear the sirens, and they feel safe, and they're like, okay, maybe it's let's leave it there, let's not report. And that's why for us it was very important to encourage these people to bring this information, to bring their information, evidences to our colleagues outside. So, and that's why we have the Eurojust initiated and assisted us and facilitated this joint investigation team. So, and we are working together, you know, to preserve this evidence and to provide to have this smooth exchange, you know, because it's really important for us to know what's going on with our citizens outside of Ukraine.
Yeah, and in terms of survivor-centered approach, Bella, how does that work in a forensic pathology context? You're there on the ground. You're not. The survivors aren't. You're not interacting with them directly, perhaps, but they're there. You know, you have to be aware of them. How do you put them at the centre of your work?
No, actually, as a pathologist, the center of the work are the victims. So I have to perform an examination and make a list of injuries or cause of death, etc. We don't really very often have interaction with the families who are victims as well. So it's only by
But the question is, I mean, should you perhaps? I don't know. Is that part of putting survivors at the centre?
At least I think it would be very important if, possibly in cooperation with the psychologist, we could talk to the victims. Because the psychologist can ensure it happens in a good way. I am not an expert in that field, but we know that having an explanation of what happened, cause of death, in these cases, seeing that we do care and that we do collect evidence is very important for those who survive.
Yeah.
And that would be, I think, a good thing to communicate also.
Yeah. Just before I go to you, Goedele. Yes, definitely. I should say to all of you here and the viewers at home, as can be expected with these things, there is some delay in the start because not all of the ministers are in the house.
Good for us, we have more time.
Exactly. We can do the real work here.
Yes. Yeah.
And on that note, yeah, I mean, that's a very concrete idea, proposal from Bella.
Yeah, what you hear here is, you know, it's the thing that I've heard there. I've been talking with politicians in Ukraine, and you probably also heard the same thing. We need two things. We need people who can help us make sure that those cases for the ICC get well prepared. So we need lawyers who are specialized in this and forensic people who can help us collect the evidence. That's one thing. And on the other part, the survivor-centered things, so psychotherapy, people who know how to work with victims of sexual violence. And why it's so important is that's what all the survivors say. They are at a certain point. I've spoken to quite a few. They're so happy that they can speak out, but they want to tell it only once or twice. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind. Like, can we tape it so that they don't have to go over and over it again? But telling it for them also is some kind of healing at a certain point. They have this recognition of hurt. They want society to realize that they were really harmed, really hurt, that they really suffered, and that's majorly important to them. And that's where justice comes in, of course, because if you really hurt, the one who did this needs to be, he cannot go just walk away with it. So that's the thing. And then the dignity, as you say, they need to be treated respectfully, they need to be believed. So yeah, there's quite some work to be done there.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, when we were driving through the country to the various locations, you could see in the population that they really appreciated the team being there because they are seen. They are noticed in the world. The world does care, even not only for the victims, but for the whole population. This seems to be very important because they were waving, they were showing hearts. It was very touching.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it must have done a lot, personally for you. You feel the emotion at such a moment.
Yes, you do, which is very motivating.
Yeah, use it as a strength. Yeah, Chloe?
I think it's important to remember that victims and survivors of agencies, they're not object or subject of accountability or, any kind of process that we project on them. They have agency and they need to be seen and recognized as driver of the justice process as well. There's many ways to understand justice. Criminal accountability is one of them, but it's not the only one. And I think, there needs to...
Give us some examples of the others.
Some people just want to have the narrative recognized. I mean, criminal accountability requires, as was said, evidence, proof. and a whole process in terms of, going through trial. This may be good for some, but not necessarily for all. I think having a narrative also that is truth-telling is another way of doing it. It's not necessarily criminal accountability. That's, many countries, South Africa and others have done those processes of truth-telling, which doesn't require the same type of, criminal accountability. So I think there are many options, and I think, there needs to also be...
But that's huge. I mean, that's a cultural shift, I think, in the West, if we were to embrace that approach.
But
is that realistic?
Well, the reality is that, and I'm sure Miroslava can say, more about this being a prosecutor, is that, criminal processes will only scratch the surface of the magnitude of crimes in conflict. So they're important, they're central. But, we also need to think outside of that box, and I think, there's been quite a lot of experience on that in many conflicts in terms of what is actually restorative justice beyond just the criminal justice. And my point is, I think it's not for us to say what is the best process. I think it's for the survivors to be at the center of the path that you need to walk for justice.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Chloe. Thank you all to all of our guests. We're now going to go live to the official opening. We'll watch it together and we'll reflect afterwards.
The city of peace and justice. We are coming together to meet the legitimate demands of people who suffer war crimes and gross violations of human rights. Our goal is to work with common purpose and coherence of action in bringing those responsible for international crimes to justice. The Dutch government, together with the International Criminal Court and the European Commission, are looking forward to your contribution and to using this moment to accelerate our collective work towards accountability. Now, please welcome Ukrainian Dutch singer Katie Kos.
Hearts will break and dreams will fade, but pain will heal and times will change. We'll all be lost before we find the things that truly change our lives. So I'll move on while you decide to come along or change your mind. I'll move on with my broken heart and my faded dreams, but I won't start all over, 'cause pain will heal and times will change, so this will never feel the same again. If I move on, if I move on, if I move on, so I'll move on. I'll move on.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is great to see all of you here today. And a special welcome to Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, who is joining us by video link, as is President Zelensky later today. The road to justice starts with the will not just to go forward, but to do so together. And with that in mind, I would like to thank our partners in hosting this conference, the International Criminal Court and the European Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, the remnants of a shelled house in the middle of a residential area of Borodyanka. Nearby, 6 makeshift graves were found. One of them was smaller than the others, not much larger than the size of a baby. These are bare facts, stripped of emotion. Yet we cannot separate them from a powerful shared conviction. The forensic pathologist Bella Kubat, who takes part in the examination of the 6 bodies, described it as a kind of higher ethical standard that we as humanity have agreed upon. That we do not do this. That we do not attack civilians. That we do not drop bombs on them. And that if you decide to do so, you will be held accountable. It is this standard, this shared conviction, that has enormous power. It took Bela Kubat to Ukraine, and it brought all of us to The Hague here today. The ICC's forensic investigation team, which Bella was part of, supported local authorities in their investigation of potential war crimes. And in many ways, that mission was unique. Never before did the ICC send a team of this magnitude. Never before did such an investigation take place so soon. And never before did we collaborate so intensively. Detachment Commander Kim Moerman, who led the team, believes this mission can be a blueprint for the future. But he also feels that something more is needed. An overarching strategy to establish the truth and ensure justice. And I couldn't agree more. Just like a climate strategy and a COVID strategy, we need an accountability strategy. A strategy driven by the universal belief that all of us are protected by law. Ensuring that all roads lead to justice, now and in the future. And the good news is we are making progress. The mandate of Eurojust has been reinforced, allowing it to collect and preserve evidence of war crimes. And the ICC is participating in a joint investigation team for the first time. And we are very grateful for all the contributions that participating countries have made. Yet more is needed. And so today, we are making an urgent appeal to all of you. Not only to act swiftly, but above all, to persevere. The Netherlands is donating an additional €1 million to the ICC. We've also pledged €1 million to support the UN Human Rights Office in Ukraine. And we are pledging €1 million for psychological support for victims of sexual violence. We're stepping up our cooperation with the ICC, and we will support the Ukrainian Prosecutor General at this difficult time. Ladies and gentlemen, humanity's history has been a long sequence of war upon war, a history of impunity and suffering. But there has also been a growing determination to fight impunity, not only because we owe it to today's victims, but also because we want to prevent future crimes. And because the road to justice helps societies across the globe to learn from grave missteps. It was in 1899 when the world came together for the Hague Peace Conference. The first call for the adjudication of war crimes was heard. And so much progress has been made since then. Aggression has become an international crime. And we've established a permanent international court that can hold individuals accountable. So in our fight against impunity, we have all the tools that we need at hand. And our next goal Our next goal is to join forces in a unified approach. Thank you very much for being here, and I wish you all a successful conference. Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC. Karim, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, really it's a great honour to be able to say a few words to you at the opening of this session, and really my debt of gratitude to the Foreign Minister, Foreign Minister Hopska, and also Commissioner Reinders is really unlimited. I think it really is a wonderful opportunity for us to co-host this event. The fact that out of your busy schedules you're here speaks actually much more eloquently and convincingly to the dire moment we're in. The simple truth is that we're living in very uncertain times, that as we speak, children, women and men, the young and the old, are living in terror. They're suffering in Ukraine and in so many different parts of the world, grieving about what they lost yesterday, holding their breath about what they could lose today and what tomorrow can bring. At a time like this, the law cannot be a spectator. The law cannot recline in comfort in The Hague or anywhere else for that matter, when it's meant to protect and uphold certain principles that are essential for humanity. This is what we're trying to do. This is why you are all here. And everybody has a part to play. Yesterday there was an event that the Foreign Minister and myself attended, members of our office, with civil society. Civil society is represented here today. States are represented here. We have a message in a moment from the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We have the SRSG under Secretary General Pramila Patten. We have other USGs for genocide and children in armed conflict that are speaking and making statements. We need to really work together, respecting the independence of different mandates, but cooperating and communicating in as effective a way as possible. As the Foreign Minister said, I think there is hope. There is hope because whilst we see the devastation of the pictures that were on our screens a moment ago, not just the physical loss, but really the devastations of people's hopes and their futures, we have brought into very stark relief, you have brought into very stark relief, that we need to have a reawakening. This is a moment to have a growth spurt of international law. For far too long, one of the maladies that have afflicted us is viewing the law as something that can be taken when we want it and ignore it when it's inconvenient. This moment of clinging to the law and applying the law in a practical way as an anchor for stability and security is one that is the requirement of the hour. So action is happening. For the first time in the life of the ICC, 43 states, a third of all state parties, referred the Ukraine situation to my office. The day after the investigation was commenced on the 2nd of March, I deployed a team to the region. We have a continuous field presence. We have a duty station now in Kyiv that we're about to open. We've used innovation with the wonderful support of the EU Commission and the redoubtable President Ladislav Hamran of Eurojust. For the first time, as the Foreign Minister said, the ICC OTP is part of a joint investigation team. Innovation, that the French deployed a forensics team, a new partnership with the Dutch that I do hope can be a blueprint, are being used. Today we're announcing guidebooks that we have co-written with Eurojust for NGOs, for civil society, and also another one for national authorities to try to make sure that we don't over-document, to try to make sure the evidence that is collected can actually have a purpose, not to gather dust on shelves for historical interest, but actually to uphold the rights of individuals and their right to be protected from genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. For me, this conference represents a need. It addresses a need of coordination, of coherence, as the Foreign Minister said, the need of an overarching strategy. We need to learn the lessons of the past. When I made this announcement, when I made the declaration on the 25th of February, I was in Cox's Bazar. And we saw there the cost of over-documentation. We've seen in Iraq and Syria the need of the Murad Code. We need to realize this is not about fiefdoms. It's not about different entities struggling and competing and rubbing against each other. It really is about a need to make sure the law can fulfill its purpose across the needs of Ukraine and to use it as an important platform for many other situations. Because really, for goodness sake, if at this moment we don't realize the law has a role to play, yes, of course, not in isolation, together with other measures we see in different parts of the world, we saw in the Balkans, we see in many other situations the need for diplomatic focus, political action, economic actions. But the law cannot be idle and it cannot be disregarded or relegated to a secondary position. If we do that, I think we have a chance to have a second wind, so to speak, a second sprint where the law has an ever more important and ever a greater role to play in the lives of individuals. But it needs you. It needs your capitals, it needs your leadership, to make sure that we don't lose focus with the economic maladies that are being confronted by many countries, with the different demands that the economies face. We need to make sure in Ukraine and in many other situations, the lives of those that look up to you, that count upon us, are vindicated by concrete action. And if we do that, I think the purpose of today will be time very well spent indeed. Thank you.
Karim, thank you so much. I would now like to give the floor to European Commissioner Didier Reynders. Didier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wopke. Ladies and gentlemen, the losses suffered by the Ukrainian people can be counted in the millions of homes destroyed by Russian bombs. They can be counted by the billions of dollars or euros needed to reconstruct the villages, towns and cities lost to this war. The Ukraine Recovery Conference brought partners together to discuss this earlier this month. But for the victims of war crimes, what they have lost cannot be counted like this. You cannot put a price on the loss of life, the loss of a family member, or the loss of a person's dignity. In March, the President of the Commission, the European Commission, tasked me with setting up a task force to coordinate EU efforts on sanctions enforcement, the Freeze and Seize Task Force. As Commissioner for Justice, I'm also responsible for coordinating all efforts to bring war criminals to justice. It is only with justice that we can help victims and their families. This is a gigantic task, not least because it requires the collection and storage of evidence in the midst of a war. It requires a strong, stable Ukrainian justice system, and it requires your support. But this is why we are here today, so I want to thank the ICC, the Dutch government, and you for being here. The link between accountability and peace is unbreakable. Accountability for war crimes is a part of a country's healing and reconstruction. Without this, it is impossible to move forward. We witnessed this 28 years ago when more than 800,000 people were systematically murdered in Rwanda. And we have since witnessed atrocities in Darfur, in Syria, and in Congo, for example, or in the Western Balkans. Almost 3 decades after the Rwandan genocide, despite many successful convictions, there are still suspects at large. But for every single crime, accountability is crucial. And as part of a country's healing, it is the country itself that must be in the driving seat. Almost immediately after the war broke out, Ukraine took many measures to step up its judicial response, including a web page where Ukrainian citizens could immediately report war crimes committed by Russian forces. This has encouraged Ukrainian victims, citizens and civil society organizations to report evidence and vital information. This must continue. For Ukraine's international partners, it is important to understand that the support we provide must be coordinated. but also complement the work that Ukraine is already doing to ensure accountability. With regard to the collection of evidence, I want to commend the courageous work of Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova and her team. They are traveling to areas in which armed activities are still ongoing to document war crimes and collect evidence. As I mentioned, civil society is also very helpful here. NGOs in Ukraine have crucial experience in documenting war crimes and crimes against humanity. I want to underline that this must be done in a way which allows it to be used as evidence before a court. It is equally important that the collection of evidence does not traumatize victims further. You will be discussing this later today. In collecting and storing evidence, Ukraine has the EU's unwavering support. This is why the European Union managed to extend the mandate of Eurojust to help store evidence. Ukraine, the ICC, the EU's member states and potentially third countries can draw from this stored evidence. I call on you to add to it and make use of it. In addition to collecting evidence, achieving accountability requires coordination. This means coordination amongst actors, but also coordination in terms of jurisdiction. Today, there are more than 20,000 investigations open on war crimes in Ukraine. 14 EU member states are investigating crimes, as well as the International Criminal Court, which has complementary jurisdiction. At the end of March, Lithuania, Poland and Ukraine set up a joint investigation team with the support of Eurojust. The Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC has since joined together with Estonia, Latvia and Slovakia. We hope that Europol will also join this joint investigation team, and we are working together with the US with an arrangement between Eurojust and the US for the good collaboration in the joint investigation team. I'm happy that in the midst of the tragedy, the EU could offer Ukraine the hope of becoming a member one day. It was extremely powerful to see the EU flag carried into the Ukrainian parliament. This is also a reason why the EU continues to encourage Ukraine to make the necessary judicial reforms, including the ratification of the Rome Statute. The European Commission and its rule of law experts are here to help Ukraine uphold the rule of law and protect its strong justice system that can stand on its own 2 feet. Equally, the European Commission is committed to ensuring that all individuals responsible for war crimes stand trial and are brought to justice. There are different actors that can help us achieve this. This will involve the ICC, but also the national courts of member states acting under active or universal jurisdiction. To conclude, accountability requires the collection of evidence and coordination. Together with a strong Ukrainian justice system, a strong ICC, and strong national courts, these are crucial elements to moving forward. With every step we take, it is important that justice remains at the forefront of our minds. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this today. And again, coordination, it's an important word because we have to work not only for the next months, the next years, but maybe the next decades. And we will continue to do that to bring all the perpetrators of atrocities in Ukraine to justice. Thank you.
Thanks so much, DJ. I would now like to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, our dear friend and colleague, Dmytro Kuleba. Dmytro, the floor is yours.
Dear Wopke, dear ministers, excellencies, I regret I was not able to join you today because of my leg and health condition, but I'm really honored and appreciative of the invitation to address you. And I would like to thank you, Wopke, in particular, for bringing together all respective representatives of countries and international institutions which do care for bringing Russia to accountability. I would also like to thank Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and the European Commission for co-organizing this conference. This is a clear demonstration of solidarity and commitment. At the outset, I want to state it crystal clear. Ukraine accuses Russia of committing a crime of aggression. Together with other nations, organizations, and institutions, we will use every available tool to seek justice for thousands of innocent victims of this crime, and we will not rest until perpetrators are held to account. We appreciate the role played by the International Criminal Court, and we see that it handles the issue with energy and commitment. But if there are no appropriate instruments which allow us to deliver justice specifically with regard to the crime of aggression, we are committed to going back to the very roots of international criminal justice to create appropriate mechanisms. And therefore, I call on all nations to back our just and legitimate quest for justice and accountability. Otherwise, if perpetrators get away with this crime, we will have to live in a dark, dark world. The war of aggression Russia is waging against Ukraine is the largest and most brutal war of aggression in Europe since 1945. It has been committed in overt defiance of the foundational principles of international law. The legal response to it shall be appropriate and resemble the response which the international community found to bring perpetrators to responsibility after World War II. As provided for in the judgment of the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, to initiate a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. Let us not forget that committing the crime of aggression is the basis for commission of other crimes under international law, in particular, crimes against humanity and war crimes, which will be investigated and prosecuted by the International Criminal Court in the most capable way. Unfortunately, there is currently no international court or tribunal that could effectively try Russia's top political and military leadership for committing the crime of aggression against Ukraine. International justice provides appropriate mechanisms to address war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during Russia's war. They are currently being investigated by Ukraine, and I'm proud that Prosecutor General of Ukraine is focused on creating the legal basis for prosecution of these crimes. A number of other states and the International Criminal Court. The referral of the situation in Ukraine by 43 states and Ukraine's previously given consent to the ICC jurisdiction over all crimes committed during the armed conflict since 2014 enables the work of the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC. Ukraine remains strongly committed to cooperating with him in his efforts. At the same time, the ICC faces objective difficulties in gaining jurisdiction over the specific crime of aggression against Ukraine for a number of legal reasons. Unfortunately, these difficulties appear to be unsurmountable for the ICC. I believe that there has never been a more appropriate time to fill in this glaring gap in the architecture of international criminal justice. This is why Ukraine calls on the establishment of a special tribunal which would have a specific jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine. We have heard a number of reservations since the idea first floated in the early March. Most of them express concern that this effort could replace existing international courts and tribunals, thus weakening them. I want to clearly reiterate, we do not have any such intention, and this will not be the outcome of our effort. In fact, we have always been working closely with all international courts and tribunals, and in particular, the ICC. Ukraine as a state has always been and remains deeply committed to international law. We wish the existing institution to be as strong, as sound as possible. All we want is the crime of aggression committed by Russia against Ukraine to not remain unpunished. A number of international organizations and national legislators have already adopted resolutions supporting the establishment of the special tribunal. Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, European Parliament, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania. The Ukrainian Parliament addressed the European Union on June 19th, calling for EU leadership on the matter. We envisage that the special tribunal should be based on rules and approaches applied by the International Criminal Court and set out in its Rome Statute. The special tribunal will investigate and prosecute for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, committed on the territory of Ukraine, as defined in Article 8 bis of the Rome Statute of the ICC. The temporary jurisdiction of the special tribunal shall cover all events since February 2014, the beginning of the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The special tribunal shall have jurisdiction over natural persons in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state. The official position of a defendant, whether as head of state or other official of a state, shall not free them from individual criminal responsibility or mitigate punishment. The special tribunal will deal only with the crime of aggression against Ukraine and will be set as an international ad hoc criminal tribunal to address the Russian war of aggression against my country. We call on our international partners to consider entering into agreement on establishment of the special tribunal for the punishment of the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Dear colleagues, I encourage all of you to look into this initiative and proceed with implementation of the initiative without delay. We owe justice to thousands of innocent victims of this unseen crime. We owe justice to the international community as a whole in order to address the most brutal attack on international law since the end of the World War II. We must fight impunity now together to leave to the next generation a world where international rule of law will always prevail. I thank you very much, and dear Wopke, I would like to once again thank you for organizing this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimitro. We will now see a video message by the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell.
Ministers, Chief Prosecutor, Commissioner, Excellencies, Russia's unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine is not only an attack on Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, but a violation of international law, the United Nations Charter and the international rules-based order. A violation of international humanitarian law with deliberated attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. I have visited Ukraine and I have witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of the Russian military aggression, the destruction, the death, and the injuries. As ever, civilians bear the worst consequences of the conflict. But let me be very clear. Perpetrators of these unspeakable crimes must and will be held accountable, whoever they are. Whoever they are, Russia's actions have severe repercussions not just for Europe but for the rest of the world. From Asia to Latin America to Africa, this is not a European war, this is not a Western war. Russia's action deliberately increases the risk of global food insecurity and disrupts international trade. The number of victims, of those whose human rights have been violated, is rising, and as the cases of conflict-related sexual violence. The European Union has been at the forefront of supporting initiatives on accountability, including the investigation by the International Criminal Court, national investigation by Ukraine, and investigation by the European Union member states. Today's meeting is a good opportunity to explore how we can further enhance our cooperation, to share the burden by using our resources efficiently, identifying concrete needs, filling gaps, and avoiding duplications. The perpetrators of the most serious international crimes must be brought to justice and held to account, in Ukraine and everywhere in the world. We owe it to the victims. Impunity is not an option. This gives full importance and value to this meeting.
I would now like to give the floor to Madam Usra Zia, Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights of the United States of America, who will address us on behalf of Secretary Blinken. Dear Usra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll now read a statement on behalf of U.S. Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken. Thank you to the Netherlands, the European Union, and the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for convening this conference. As this meeting takes place, Russian forces continue to commit atrocities in Ukraine with harrowing intensity, as they've done since further invading their sovereign neighbor on February 24th. With each day, the war crimes mount. Rape, torture, extrajudicial executions, disappearances, forced deportations. Attacks on schools, hospitals, playgrounds, apartment buildings, grain silos, water and gas facilities. These are not the acts of rogue units. They fit a clear pattern across every part of Ukraine touched by Russia's forces. And they fit a clear pattern with Russia's previous actions in conflicts in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, and Ukraine starting in 2014. Every one of these attacks has its victims. Like the 47 people killed, including a 9-year-old boy in a Russian strike on an apartment complex in Chasiv Yar last weekend. That number will likely rise as first responders continue to dig through the rubble. This is just one of more than 20 attacks in one day in one region of Ukraine. Every atrocity sends out waves of suffering that most of us cannot comprehend, inflicting wounds on victims and their loved ones that may never fully heal. It's our responsibility to hold the perpetrators accountable and deliver justice and support for the growing number of victims. We can support Ukraine's Office of the Prosecutor General in its efforts to hold accountable perpetrators in the country's justice system and to coordinate with international inquiries, as the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom are doing through the Atrocity Crimes Prevention and Advisory Group. We can support national courts when they establish jurisdiction over individuals accused of committing international crimes in Ukraine and against Ukrainians deported to Russia. We can support international and multilateral efforts to collect and examine the mounting evidence of atrocities in Ukraine, including those by the International Criminal Court. We can undertake our own efforts to gather evidence of war crimes and make it available to national and international investigations, as we are doing through the Conflict Observatory. We can support the work of civil society groups, documenting abuses and providing support to survivors. And we can better integrate their findings into investigations. We can provide survivors with access to medical care, psychosocial services, and other vital assistance. And when we gather evidence from these individuals, we can ensure we engage in a way that is survivor-centered and trauma-informed, so that we don't exacerbate their suffering. Countries in every part of the world are already supporting many of these efforts, which is a testament to our global unity in standing with victims in Ukraine. But this attention makes our coordination crucial. The same goes for justice efforts worldwide. Since February 24th, I've spoken with human rights defenders from around the globe, and they've consistently offered 2 warnings about this crisis. First, allowing grave abuses in Ukraine to go unpunished will not only embolden the Kremlin, but brutal regimes everywhere. And second, the international community must bring greater attention and resources to bear on other parts of the world where atrocities are being committed with impunity. They are right. We don't have to choose between focusing on justice in Ukraine and other crises. Everything we're doing to lay the foundation for accountability in Ukraine, we can and must do wherever atrocities are being committed. All victims of grave international crimes deserve equal access to justice, regardless of where they take place and who perpetrates them. So let us use the clarity and unity of this moment to broaden our ambition, knowing that the steps we take toward justice anywhere will advance the fight against impunity everywhere. For the history of the pursuit of justice teaches us that these efforts can take years or even decades. Just ask some of the countries represented here, like Colombia, Ireland, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Or ask the victims of the Assad regime's Branch 251, where thousands of civilians were tortured at the outset of Syria's civil war. From 2011 to 2012, that facility was overseen by Syrian Colonel Anwar Raslan. He was detained in Germany in 2019 and later tried in a German court. In January 2022, Raslan was convicted of crimes against humanity and sentenced to life in prison. A single conviction may seem small alongside the atrocities committed in Syria, but in the words of one survivor who testified in Raslan's trial, it is the beginning of a path. We owe it to victims everywhere and those vulnerable to such atrocities to work relentlessly to stop these crimes. And we owe it to them to stay on the long path to justice, so that when perpetrators are eventually forced to stand for their crimes, and that day will come, the case against them will be unimpeachable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azra. We now see a video message by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet.
Excellencies, distinguished participant, this conference in the City of Peace and Justice comes at a critical moment, almost 5 months into a conflict of destruction unseen in Europe for decades, and with ramifications for countries and people worldwide that are worsening by the day. From its outset, I have insisted, as in conflict wherever they may arise, on the vital importance of accountability for violations of international law, for violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, and for violations of international criminal law, all wherever and by whomever committed. In that, the human rights of victims and their families to truth, justice, and reparation are our fundamental baselines. My office, through its Human Rights Monitoring Mission, has been monitoring and reporting on the situation in Ukraine for over 8 years. And since 24 February, the mission has been verifying allegations of gross violation of international human rights law and serious violation of international humanitarian law in the context of the Russian Federation's armed attack on Ukraine. The number of these allegations and their gravity are appalling, and a great many concern violations, including conflict-related sexual violence that may amount to war crimes. Our mission will continue its essential work of documenting, monitoring, and reporting. The UN Human Rights Council also quickly took an important step in establishing an eminent commission of inquiry to conduct investigative work into the situation, a process with which my office is also fully engaged by way of support. Excellencies, justice, we know, is best served at the national level, consistent with international due process and fair trial standards. The national justice system of Ukraine has already taken important steps of investigation and trial, which we are monitoring. Given the breadth of the challenges it is facing, it is crucial that the international community continues to support increased capacity for Ukraine's investigations into alleged war crimes committed on its territory, whatever the circumstances. In that, I acknowledge the efforts to date led by the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. The appropriate collection and preservation of evidence, including forensic evidence, which can in turn be utilized in legal proceedings, is key to ensuring accountability. And I urge this conference to marshal further support for Ukraine's authorities in this area. The International Criminal Court, for its part, is seized within its jurisdiction with formal investigation, while beyond that, a multiplicity of other actors of international and regional level, as well as non-state actors, have been engaged, both individually and in various combinations, on different aspects. We know from unfortunate experience the risk of overlap and inefficiency, as well as re-victimization and re-traumatization of victims and families that can result from cross-cutting and duplicative efforts, however well-intentioned. Such outcomes can and must be avoided. In addition, programs for supporting accountability should consistently be founded on a victim-centered approach, framed by the rights, needs, and interests of victims, along with access to necessary rehabilitation and support services. As I have previously emphasized, effective coordination between these efforts within respective mandates and under applicable legal frameworks is key to ensuring both best complementarity and focused use of limited resources. This conference offers an important platform to move towards translating these shared principles into operational realities that work on the ground. In conclusion, I recall the binding order of the International Court of Justice, also delivered in this city on the 16th of March 2022, for the Russian Federation to suspend the military operation that had commenced in February 2022 in the territory of Ukraine. Compliance with that ruling continues to be essential to bring to an end the violence of arms we continue to witness daily and the recurrent violations and abuses in its wake. To ensure accountability and consistent with its own obligations, the Russian Federation must also investigate, prosecute, and punish members of armed forces found to have committed violations of international humanitarian law. I thank you for your attention.
Now, welcome back, everybody. That was the official opening of the Ukraine Accountability Conference. A lot to unpack, and I'm pleased to be able to do that with my guests who stayed here, Miroslava, Chudle, Chloe, and Bella. Thank you for staying with us. Chloe, I saw you busily writing notes and nodding. What struck you the most from what we just heard?
I think what struck me the most was the energy, the focus, and the commitments that we heard today on accountability for international crimes. I think we're at the pivotal moment in terms of international justice. Karim Khan from the ICC mentioned that, and a few others. And I think this can be the litmus test in terms of whether international justice and the structure we built for it stands that reality, and whether that can mean we can translate the commitments, the political commitments that we heard today, into action. Yeah.
You're optimistic about that, I presume.
Well, I think political will is the first.
I saw a hesitation.
No, but political will is the first step, and the absolute necessity for any kind of action to occur. Yeah. So I'm encouraged by what we heard. I think we need, and one of the speakers said it, we need sustained effort. Justice doesn't come overnight. It's a process, and that means that we need to, in a world where instantaneity is, constantly shifting us from one thing to another, I think, Ukraine and the victims and the survivors will need support for the years to come. So I hope this is what we can count on. Yeah,
the word decades was used a couple of times as well, I think. Miroslava, did anything take you by surprise?
Yeah, I would say that it's not about surprise. It's a lot of messages I would echo the same, because as you can imagine, it's very personal for me. Yeah. But maybe just these two words that Minister Hoekstra mentioned. He said several times, never before, and this is something that resembled me with another two words, never again, And this is something that I would really, really want us all work together, for children, never again clearly distinguish the difference between the sound of missile and the plane, and never again orders should spend their days and nights in, in bathroom, and never again people should die from a shortage of food or water just because somebody decided to invade their country and to suppress them. And, another moment that was said, and indeed it's, somehow maybe...
Before you go to that other moment, I'll tell you what, let's run a clip of a reminder of what Minister Hoekstra said.
Never before did the ICC send a team of this magnitude. Never before did such an investigation take place so soon. And never before did we collaborate so intensively.
Before we go to your other reflection, I mean, one thing that strikes me hearing that, though, is why on earth hasn't it happened before?
Because I believe that it's also that there is such a huge support and solidarity, you know, and especially that we have this unity in achieving accountability, because we have, you know, like national investigation in Ukraine. We have also different investigation in other countries based on universal jurisdiction, and we have ICC, who is conducting its own independent investigation. And we really need to put this together, you know, like a puzzle, to see the bigger picture and to ensure that there is no gaps, you know.
I mean, solidarity is great, but I mean, is that going to give comfort to, we may have at home, you know, Syrians watching, Yemenis, Afghans. We've heard Chief Prosecutor Khan talking about the level of innovation and deployment that happens so quickly.
I believe they say, you know, that this particular war, it will be one of the most documented conflict, you know, because it really goes online. So you see all this information, as it was mentioned, about this resource where people can really submit their evidences, their information about crimes online. And a lot of different data, a lot of, you know, OSINT data, all the rest. And this is something that is really new. And it's also something that I would say, comparing to other conflicts, that Ukraine is in position to investigate these crimes itself. So Ukrainian authorities are capable and they are operational and they can do the investigation and further prosecution. This is something that was also very, I would say, comparing to different situations with other conflicts.
Yeah. I don't think anyone want to add anything? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I've written down never again, because it's a really important thing, and also for the survivors of sexual violence. They all, if they want to feel a sense of justice, for them, the prevention part is important. Like to say, this shouldn't happen again. This shouldn't happen to my daughter, my sister, and there we need to be brave and courageous, because that means that we have to emphasize on gender equality, even worldwide, because we do know that soldiers with gender unequal norms are more likely to commit sexual violence. So this is a really brave thing that we need to do. We need to focus on gender equality worldwide. This means textbooks, education, access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. We need to have to give girls and women the power to decide for themselves. And that's the foundation of a kind of prevention, because, and justice, of course, is really important. Justice to take the guys who did this to bring
Are you
them to
disappointed
sentence,
then? Because I didn't hear any of that being talked about here.
No, exactly. For me, we need to go a step further. We need to look at how can we prevent those things from happening, because we know it's not only in Ukraine. The Yazidis had this, in Rwanda this happened. So it's really a weapon of war that they use as a strategic thing to a genocide even sometimes. Yeah. So we have to focus into that part as well.
Yeah. Okay, let's change focus a little bit and let's run the clip from Dimitro Kuleba.
If there are no appropriate instruments which allow us to deliver justice specifically with regard to the crime of aggression, we are committed to going back to the very roots of international criminal justice to create appropriate mechanisms. And therefore, I call on all nations to back our just and legitimate quest for justice and accountability.
Yeah, I think, Chloe or Miroslava can perhaps best speak to this. Minister Kuleba was talking a lot about, the creation of a special tribunal. Why so much focus on that?
I would say, because on our side, we really look for all the possibilities to bring justice, and if there is any gaps, any legislation gaps, any institutional gaps, we're really looking for all the possibilities to ensure that all kinds of crimes would be punished, just as we said, to ensure that it's never again.
Yeah. And in terms of building momentum on everything that's been said, what are the hurdles to, let's say, to creating the cohesion that, and the coordination that everyone was talking about? What would you say, Chloe?
I mean, I think, we've heard in a number of the statement the magnitude of the task and the magnitude of the cases. I think, yesterday we were having, discussions with the Office of the Prosecutor General, and I think, she mentioned she has already some 20,000 cases, criminal cases, right? And as I mentioned before, this is only the tip of the iceberg, generally speaking. So the magnitude of the task needs to make us pause. And I think, we heard a lot about the need for coordination. I think there's work for everyone when the task is so huge. Probably even with all the resources and all the actors that, are now interacting and, going into the situation, that probably won't be enough. So, I think we need to take this in. And, again, I think one of the ways to deal with the many actors that are on the ground, mobilizing and, with good intentions. There is a risk, I think Karim Khan mentioned it, of over-documentation, of documentations in, not necessarily along the guidelines of ethical work and, respect and non-traumatization, in particular for conflict-related sexual violence that are particular vulnerable types of victims. Yeah. So the central hook, I think, for this coherence, and we heard call for strategies. I think that's a good starting point to have a strategy rather than to be ad hoc. So having a strategy and building that strategy, around, again, a survivor-centered approach. Yeah. Having the interest, I think the High Commissioner said it, the rights, interest, and aspiration of the survivors as basically our beacon in terms of how we're going to go into the situation, how we're going to build that strategy, should be something that we need to think about.
But when you hear about the scale, the magnitude of what's involved here, Bella, I mean, you're there on the ground, you and your team, your sleeves rolled up. You can't deal with this number of...
You can't deal with it on your own. That's why we need cooperation with many parties, other countries, who can support the investigation in the various fields. And this support has to be coordinated to ensure that the evidence collected, whatever kind of evidence, has the same quality. That is one thing. The other thing is not only collection of evidence, but keeping the chain of custody. So ensuring the evidence is not corrupted while awaiting a trial is also very important. And it's very hard to have a good chain of evidence in the Netherlands. So it's even harder in a country involved in a military conflict. That also is something which needs a lot of attention, because potentially it will take a long time before crimes come to court. And all the time this evidence must stay good, must not be corrupted. So potentially there also will be a necessity of support of other countries, coordination and a cooperative plan.
Yeah, indeed. I think the Commissioner was stressing the need for quality evidence.
Yes.
I'm just thinking of the NGOs, local NGOs in Ukraine, who are soon going to be overwhelmed with strategies and, okay, we need new communication lines and... Is it feasible for them to deal with this? You've been there.
I think they really want and in need of the help. And I think it's very encouraging that this conference is taking place now, already during the conflict, which doesn't happen, it hasn't happened before, that it already starts now. And that's important because we need to be prepared. The big storm will come post-conflict period. And we have to be prepared for that with the psychologists and those services as well. So I think it's encouraging, and the NGOs, the ones I've spoken, they really very, very much wanting the help and even screaming for help. So let's do this.
Okay, let's go first of all to a clip. I think Karim Khan and Minister Reinders also referenced the local NGOs. Let's run those clips.
For me, this conference represents a need. It addresses a need of coordination, of coherence, as the Foreign Minister said, the need of an overarching strategy.
For Ukraine's international partners, it's important to understand that the support we provide must be coordinated, but also complement the work that Ukraine is already doing to ensure accountability.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were going to add to that, because, I mean, we need to complement their work, but I'm just concerned it's just unworkable to try and do that.
Yeah, you know, I was Bella, I would just want to say the same stuff as Bella, because coordination is key here, you know, because a lot of people, a lot of different organizations have a very, very good intentions, but without coordination.
And what do they need to coordinate? Are we data sharing?
I will explain you.
Okay.
I will do it. For example, you know, we remember when the certain parties of Kyiv region were liberated. It was a huge rush of NGOs who wanted to help and to facilitate the interviews and etc., etc., etc. But at the end of the day, for these evidences to be admissible in the court, it should be investigator or prosecutor who takes the statement. Because NGO people, they can take a wonderful statement, very detailed one, but it would be not admissible. And this is, and as you said, you know, that sometimes people are ready to say only once, because it's too difficult for them to, you know, like again and again, because first they say this to NGO, the second time they say this to journalists. And when the investigator comes, they said like, look, guy, I've told everything, what I know, I don't want to speak about this anymore. And at the end of the day, you have nothing to bring to the court. And that's why here, and what we are also doing in Office of the Prosecutor General in Ukraine, we are coordinated with NGOs that, look, there is certain evidences, there is certain information that you can gather yourself. But when it comes to statements, to official statements, please coordinate with us. Because this is something that should be chain of command, and that should be really gathered very, very properly.
Yeah. And this applies to local NGOs, but also probably international ones coming in to think they're helping.
Yes, that's why it's very important to know the local legislation, because our needs, how it's, you know, in the Ukrainian legislation.
So in the short term, we're talking, go ahead.
Actually, that's what I wanted to add. If we develop, we here in the Netherlands or EU, if we develop a strategy and a plan, we must do it with Ukraine. Not about or for Ukraine, but it's absolutely crucial that we do it with Ukraine, because Ukrainians know their legislations and they must feel comfortable with all the measures that we are so very willing to offer. And that's very important, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Bella, yes.
Chloe?
I mean, I think it's coordination is key, and you know, both Bella and Miroslava, you know, reminded us why. I do think, and we've seen it, you know, there is mobilization at the member state level, at the Ukrainian authorities level. There's also, you know, mobilization at the civil society level, and you know, there is room for improvement for everyone, I think, and you know, there is a need for support of national institutions and of civil society. To skill everyone to actually be able to make a difference on the ground. And in terms of strategy, I think, you know, strategies are always important. It's also very important they're not imposed, and that, you know, all of the stakeholders actually build the strategy together so that they're working towards a common goal, and that includes, you know, including civil society and the voices of victims and survivors.
Because it's a common criticism of international organizations that they just parachute in with ideas and strategies, but this really needs to be crafted together.
That's right.
Are there any precedents of where or is this the first time this is really happening on the ground? But
no, I think you see it. I think, you know, civil society always has a voice. I mean, in many of the conflicts, and I think it's just important to ensure that there is that consultative process, that there are those bridges that are built with the different stakeholders, so that it's not one-sided.
Yeah. Okay.
These images.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I look at you, I see those horrible images all the time.
Yeah.
So, whoa.
And that is something that's been it's a conscious decision, I think, at this conference, to have this kind of fully immersive atmosphere here.
The entrance.
Yeah. You walk in, and for people at home, as people walk in, you're confronted by yeah, huge photographs of yeah, really harrowing pictures, and I think perhaps we have some shots of them as well. Even I think the wood is supposed to resemble like being underground, and you can smell like burnt wood. It's I mean, do images like this still affect you? I guess they do.
Yes, they do. And it's, as a psychologist, I would say a sad thing that they are needed in one way, because I think if you want to shift people's minds and to make people realize this is important and we need to do something, you have to touch their heart.
So you
and then
think
it goes
they
to
will
the brain.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we still need those images. This is not fiction. This is reality.
Yeah.
So we need to show people this is happening. So all to put our power together and yeah, to make this work. Yeah.
And if Goedele, you had your podium at that huge round table that we saw, what would you say to the ministers? What do they need to prioritize?
Well, I think what I've just heard, and that it's really like that those people in Ukraine, we need definitely to work with them together. They're really screaming for support. On different levels, also for prosecuting, as I said, they say we need lawyers who know how to work with ICC, we need all those, but also the volunteers, the nurses, also they realize we have some people here who are really traumatized, and we do not have the skills to give them the psychological services needed. So they really do realize also for the witnessing and telling the story again and again. So I think we shouldn't worry there. And then for me, again, as I said, the prevention part is really important, the part where we say, how can we prevent those kind of cruelties to happen again? And then we do know that gender roles are often used to justify sexual violence. So I think we really need to work on that worldwide. And again, it's a critical topic, and we need to be courageous. But it's the only way up.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably too many men as well at that big round table. That's what we need to change.
Well, we need men on board, and most of men are great. So let's work with them.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Okay, on that note, I'm going to say thank you to all of our guests here. We've heard the official opening. We've analysed everything. Now it's time for the ministers to do their bit behind closed doors for the moment. We'll be back later on. To be more specific, 5 to 1. Yeah, around then. 5 past 1, rather. So just before the closing remarks of the conference, join us here for more up-to-the-minute analysis at the Ukraine Accountability Conference.